Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today, our topic is genetic optimization enhancing your unique code. This topic is the idea that a person can enhance their genetic expression through natural methods. Many people think that genes determine your health and you're kind of stuck with what you're dealt. Basically, they think erroneously that you get a set of genes inherited by your parents, and that means you're going to get certain diseases and you're going to die. And those are going to be the diseases that kill you, and that's your lot in life, and you can only take medications to stave it off until the end of your life. And that's really a powerless kind of approach to living, and I think it's a fatalistic idea that really says you don't have much you can do about it. The interesting thing for me is that people have a lot of power over their lives, and they can do stuff to change how their outcomes are. Those methods include how they eat, how they deal with their stress, how they sleep, how they deal with their light environment, blue light, red light, UV light, EMF, electromagnetic fields, toxic chemicals that are in their lives. And essentially the real lesson is that epigenetics, which is the stuff that's in your life and affects you and comes in from outside, is actually more important than your genes generally. Now, there's a few rare genetic diseases that if you're born with, they can code for some pretty terrible things. One of them is Huntington's chorea, there's Tay-Sachs disease, there's a couple of anemias out there, and some cancers certainly, but most cancers and most chronic illnesses are absolutely avoidable, and you may not know that. So today, very briefly, I'm just going to take you through some food and lifestyle and mitochondrial mechanisms and some issues regarding saturated fat. We're going to talk about gene expression, we're going to talk about blue light and chemicals, we're going to talk about toxic exposures, stress and sleep, just very briefly. So the way the system works is all your genes are wrapped up and tied up. They're tied up attached to little things called histones. And those histones, you can imagine them like a fuzzy tennis ball. And they wrap up the genetic code, which is a long, long string, and they tie it up. Because inside every cell is a nucleus, and in the nucleus is the genes, which are the instructions. And they're in these long strings. And these long strands have the instructions for how to build proteins, and those proteins are how to build enzymes. And as we build enzymes, those enzymes do things for us. Those are the things that are the work inside your cells. The cool thing that you don't probably know about DNA is that most DNA is turned off, shut down, and closed. Not only is the instructions not working, but the book for the instructions is closed. It's absolutely shut. And that is because we don't want your cell doing abnormal things when it's doing its normal job. You don't want cardiac cells doing liver duties. You don't want teeth growing out of the inside of your guts. You don't want hair growing out of your eyeball. So we want to have all the excess genes turned off in every cell. So most of the time, our system is pretty good at shutting down and wrapping up and tying up DNA around these histones so that they're not expressed. If we have a problem with that, it's called undermethylation or overmethylation. And typically, if you're undermethylated, which is the most common state, that means that you haven't methylated a compound in your body, and that's another chemistry that I've explained a lot about before. If you haven't done that very well, you will have open genes. And so this problem of open genes means that all these old oncogenes, all these old cancer genes, all these different genetic codes for all kinds of diseases can express themselves. So you kind of let the genie out of the bottle when you don't take care of keeping your genes locked down. The great thing about humans is that we keep our genes locked down every day by keeping our stress low, our nutrients high, and our toxins down, and regulating our EMFs and our blue light. So that's what we're really talking about today, is we can really change this and turn it off. All the stuff that I'm talking to you right now about is nuclear DNA. It's the DNA inside the nucleus of our cells. It turns out that not only is that DNA mostly locked down and rendered unimportant and safe by being tied up with this methylation process, but there's another set of genes that are called our mitochondrial DNA, and they're the DNA that comes only from our mother's side. All throughout human history, it's only maternal, and that's the genes for the mitochondria, which are the little tiny powerhouses inside every cell that make power. They make chemical power for us, which is fuel, and that fuel is called ATP. Some of you have heard of that. ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's just a power-generating molecule that gives us the power we need to make things happen inside our cells. So the really beautiful thing and the gift that we've gotten about this mitochondria is the mitochondrial DNA is smaller and less damaging and more important to control the rest of our bodies, including our nuclear DNA. So our mitochondrial DNA is more powerful than our nuclear DNA. Now, everybody talks about nuclear DNA, the DNA in the nucleus. That's those, 22, 23,000 genes, 20-something thousand genes that we studied in the Human Genome Project. Those are the genes that we talk about when we talk about getting SNP tests, SNP SNP tests, or when we talk about getting other tests for diseases, or even tolerance tests for drugs in psychiatry, when we get a tolerance test to find out how much we can tolerate a particular psychiatric drug. So it's really important to know that the great gift of ours is not only that mitochondria trump regular gene codes, but that mitochondria are fueled by infrared light. So if we can get a high amount of infrared light from the sun every day, we can turn the best genes on in our mitochondria, which will turn the worst genes off in our nuclear DNA, which will literally inhibit cancer and literally inhibit all of the bad genes we inherited from our lineage, from our family line. So if you got a family that's inherited a bunch of illnesses, one of the best ways to turn those genes off is to get infrared light exposure from the sun. That's what we're talking about. It's that simple. What are some of the other things that can affect a person that would make their genes express worse genes and have the bad genes turn on, and other things that would make the good genes turn on and turn off the bad genes? Well, there's a bunch of them. The most important thing that we have to talk about is the idea of saturated fat and seed oils. If we get good saturated fat is actually an antioxidant. And an antioxidant means that there's fewer sites open for oxygen to get in and damage the cell. So if there's fewer sites for oxygen to get in and damage the cell, then saturated fat is actually good for us. Saturated fat in our diet. Seed oils with omega-6 oils and mostly rancid omega-6 oils are really bad. We don't want those. So it's good to get rid of sunflower, safflower, palm oil, palm kernel oil, peanut oil, cottonseed oil, those kinds of things. So we want to eat saturated fat from animal products. We want to eat as saturated fat as we can from vegetable oils. Things like, olive oil is better. It's not the best, but it's certainly better. Avocado oil is better. Those are better than the other oils I named. So that's really important for keeping our gene expression working. Another thing that we need to know is trace minerals. If we don't have enough trace minerals in our body, we can't make our genes turn on and off adequately, and we can't make their enzymes that they code for work well. So if we want to have plenty of trace nutrients, we've got to eat trace minerals. That means we've got to eat some kind of Celtic sea salt. We've got to take a trace mineral pill that has 60 or 70 trace minerals like, chromium and vanadium, and probably heard of molybdenum and manganese. These are trace minerals that aren't talked about as much as iron and copper and zinc, for example, or calcium and magnesium. These are trace minerals that are usually in small amounts in the earth. They're in small amounts in the air. They're blown around the jet stream, and we actually inhale them more than we eat them in very, very small amounts. So that's really important to get trace minerals. One of the big problems about not getting trace minerals absorbed is we might eat them or we might breathe them in, but we might not use them very much because of lectins. So if we eat a lot of plant antinutrients from a lot of vegetables and plants that have a lot of antinutrients like lectins and phytates and oxalates and other types of tannins, there's a whole bunch of chemicals that are in plants that bind to our natural vitamins and minerals and proteins, and they make us lose them in our stool. So they bind to these nutrients and we lose them in our stool. So it's important to get rid of lectins. That's why I tend to ask people to try an elimination diet that looks carnivore and looks keto, and that person can then find out what their tolerance is. You might decide after doing an elimination diet that's pretty keto and pretty carnivore that you can go back and have some plants, or you might not. It's not my job to dictate to you what you should eat. In fact, sometimes the carnivore community gets really mad at me because I do say that some people can eat plants. And the reason I do that is because my patients and the patients I help with, the other doctors I advise, a lot of them are mental health patients. They've got problems with mental health. They've got challenges with their brain. They've got depression, anxiety. They've got long-standing stresses, and they can't be perfect. And so when they start, they need to have a bridge. They need to have a transition. They need to have a way of nudging them so they can go from where they are now to where they want to be. But they can't do it overnight, and they can't be strict. So you guys in the carnivore world, you got to be able to forgive them and let them do what they need to do at the pace they need to do it. Because if you've ever had a mental health problem, you know it can be really hard to go cold turkey and completely change overnight. And some people need compassion and time and help. If you've got eating disorders, if you've got depression, if you've got suicidal ideation, these kinds of things, you really need to be working with a professional and going slow, because these things can upset the redox balance, or the oxidative reductive balance of the cells in the brain. And so any type of change can be too fast for a person. So that's why I like for people to go slowly with their dietary changes if they're feeling like it's too much. Now, certainly if you want to go cold turkey and you want to go really fast, then talk with your doctor and go fast. I don't object to that, but I don't want to tell people that they have to be, particularly exact right away and super strict. There are also chemicals in the world. We need to detoxify chemicals. We need to find out about heavy metals. We need to find out about pesticides, herbicides. We need to do mold testing and find out if these things are in our lives. If we have these things in our lives, we really need to get rid of them. Some people have very toxic root canal teeth in their jaw, where the tooth has been root canaled and yet it's still making toxins and has osteonecrosis, which is dead bone inside the tooth. Sometimes that happens. It's very hard to find. Sometimes thermography can find it. Very often, when I want to find it, I will order a high-resolution CT scan with thin slices of the bone of the tooth to try to see the osteonecrosis, and I will let the radiologist diagnose the osteonecrosis and tell the dentist what tooth to pull. That way, I don't have to do that as a chiropractor. The next item is EMF, electromagnetic fields. It's really important to know what your EMF environment looks like in your home. If you've got a problem where your routers in your home, your TVs, your computers, your cell phones, your microwave, all these different devices are putting out different waves, and they can affect our cells, especially the fact that they burst and change. If it was a steady signal, it wouldn't be so bad, but biological systems, it turns out, are really sensitive to varying signals. And all of our devices these days on 5G and other types of electrical fields, they pulse on and they give a packet of message, and then they pulse off, and then they pulse on and pulse off. So if you've ever got a detector, an EMF detector, and you've used it, you know that these phones and devices, they burst and then they stop, and that's very stressful on biological systems. So you may have to turn off or shield or get a Faraday bag or somehow cover or move away from you. If you move these devices away from you or your desk, it will help a lot. And then blue light. Blue light is important. People are exposed to the blue light spectra in artificial blue light, and it really can mess with both their eyes and the blue light receptors all over their bodies. So it's really important to get in sunlight and get exposed to infrared light and UV light that's natural from the sun without getting overexposed to blue light in artificial environments, especially when it's not noon. Our biology gets hijacked and it messes up our DNA when we think that it's high noon at 6 p.m. or 9 p.m. or midnight when we see blue light from a light bulb or from a screen or from a phone. So you want to change all your light bulbs, you want to change all your monitors, you want to change all your phones to something that is more red shifted. And there's several different apps that do that. The Iris app does that. There are other apps that do that built into your phone, built into your computer. Some are better than others, but at least it's better than nothing. And so it's always a nudge. You're always trying to do that. You may have seen me wear those goofy orange glasses that everybody's wearing. And so that's something that I wear when it's not near noon and I'm exposed to blue lights in an indoor environment. That's one way that I can help block that blue light. But there's really no replacement for being in the sun. The last one is stress and sleep. So it's really important to make sure that a person has good sleep hygiene and can get to sleep. If you don't have good sleep, there are lab tests you can do, and there are brain scans that you can do. Find out what's going on with your brain waves, like a QEEG, or a bunch of lab tests that are blood or urine or saliva or even stool tests that can be done, and even hair tests, to find out how your chemistry is and see if there's a reason why your sleep is messed up. I've done many other videos on it, so please check out my channel and all the different free stuff that I give you on how to do that. So think about turmeric and boswellia as natural anti-inflammatories, milk thistle as a detox, zinc and copper as a really common mineral deficiency, and then don't forget glyphosate. I think glyphosate is the most important chemical toxin of our day in agriculture. It's Roundup, and it's really very damaging to the brain. It helps block copper, and it helps increase aluminum crossing into the blood-brain barrier, as do adjuvants in jabs. So it's very important for us to know about sources of aluminum, because aluminum does get into our brain and cause problems like autism and Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And that's been well proven in the literature. So I hope that works for you, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks.